All right, welcome back to another episode of D2D Success Stories. Here today with Christian DeLuca. Welcome, man.
Heck yeah. Thank you for having me.
Yeah, man. Stoked. So, in today from California.
Yep. Chico, California, Northern
Awesome.
California.
Represent. There
Yep.
we go. So I'll intro you a little bit to kind of get started, and then we'll go from there. So, founder of an EPC, fully integrated, solar outfit called OHM, OHM.
Yep.
And Golden Door winner.
Yep.
Previously, love that. And just a young dude, honestly. 20, just barely turned 26. We were talking about that.
Yeah.
Cool, man. So accomplishing big things, and has an org out in Northern California, 4 teams in 2 cities, about 100 guys.
Yep.
Love it, man. So with that kind of as the intro, let's go back kind of to the beginning. Tell us about a little bit about growing up and family life and all that type of stuff.
Yeah. Funny enough, I got into the solar space and specifically the door-to-door space in a really weird way.
Mm-hmm.
So I like to say I'm the first of the second generation of door-to-door. So I feel like a lot of people, especially with Vivint and starting with solar, a lot of that started happening in 2012 to 2013 in California. So when I was growing up, right around 2008, my parents owned athletic clubs in Northern California.
Yep.
And so I grew up showing up to the athletic clubs. I was the little kid handing out towels at the front and everything.
Mm-hmm.
And during the 2008 economy crash, parents ended up losing their business.
Uh-huh.
And so we went from living this lavish lifestyle. Honestly, I was kind of a spoiled kid.
Yeah.
And then I think it's so good to humble you when you're a little bit younger.
Yep.
And you get perspective too. You get to see what abundance looks like versus what scarcity looks like.
Yep.
And so
and what the abundance comes from too.
Yeah.
Because kids always just think it's magic.
Yeah.
You know what I mean?
My dad goes to work and he comes up with a ton of money or whatever. But it was cool because I got to see exactly what you're saying is the late nights when my dad is inside painting the gym and it's why are you doing that? And he's I want to put sweat equity into this place and all these things. So you start to learn these really cool lessons at a young age. And but after that happens, they end up, losing a good majority of everything.
Mm-hmm.
And funny enough, my dad starts working at Vivint. And so he's showing up to the house in this orange polo, and he used to be in a suit every single day.
Yeah.
And I'm what are you doing? He's well, I'm selling solar door to door. And I'm door to door? And even at 10 years old, I have this preconceived notion about what door to door is.
Yeah.
And
how old is he roughly?
So my dad at that time was about 50, 51. So
yeah.
definitely later in his career.
Dude, it's funny because somebody, there's certain people outside of our industry who might even be oh, that's sad or whatever. But I'm just props for never feeling like you're too good for something.
Yep.
You know what I mean?
Yeah.
It's, again, I talk about this repeatedly on this podcast, but it's kind of one of the reasons I wanted to do this is to just show pride in what we do.
Yep.
You know what I mean?
Yeah.
Yeah.
Yeah. At any age level. And it's funny, there's not a common denominator I've seen as to somebody's success.
Mm-hmm.
People come from so many different backgrounds and ages and ethnicities and all those things. And so he starts, selling door to door and he starts doing really well. Mm-hmm. And he ends up working for Vivint. Then he starts working for some local EPCs. And so as I'm growing up, I want to be just like my dad. And so I tell him, I'm as soon as I graduate, I want to start selling door to door. And I expect him to be let's do it. Come on. That's great. Yeah. I'm so proud of you. And he looks at me and he goes no. And I'm what? He's you need to go and work 3 jobs before you do this because you're not going to respect the opportunity if you don't.
Oh, I love that.
And I'm what the heck? You're telling me how hard it is to recruit all the time because there's no salary that you can give these guys and it's commission only. And so I end up going and working at Safeway, a grocery store. And this is all just to get to door to door.
Yeah.
End up going and working at Costco. Every single job I'd start and then 6 months in I'd quit because I just wanted to go sell. Then my 3rd job in, I ended up working at a BMW and Mercedes dealership, quit, go to door, and I go to my dad and I'm oh my God, he better hold his word on this one. I go to him can I start? He's yes. So I end up working with my dad and we were working at a local EPC.
Dude, let me just pause too because let me just elaborate on why I love that. I talk about this all the time, but it's there's so many kids who think that this job sucks.
Yeah.
And it's, there's multiple variations of it, right? There's a lot of kids who this is their first job and they're still in some kind of 20-year-old, maybe I go to college, no man's land.
Yep.
And so I always say to them, I'm hey, If you compare this to being a jobless bum playing video games, that might sound more fun.
Yeah. Yeah.
If you first assume that you have to be gainfully employed and you only compare this against other jobs,
Yes.
then this is pretty solid.
Yeah.
You know what I mean?
Yeah. Yeah. I'm with you there.
So that's like one. The other is like, the other thing I see is kids will start doing this fresh out of high school, fresh off a mission, whatever, first real thing they're doing, and they kill it and they ball out till they're like 27. And then they think that they're going to go do something so much better. Yeah. It's like they were almost like smitten by their success, but it's like, bro,
yeah.
Maybe nobody told you, but there's not a lot that's better.
Yeah, you can't find anything better.
Yeah.
And I feel like I was so blessed to have the mentality that this wasn't a means to an end. Like this was the end for me. This is like what I'm doing for
and your
life.
Your dad made you do a couple things that are worse.
Yeah, 100%. Like I can promise you that working at a grocery store is nowhere near like, and just being around those type of people as well. And when you're working at a grocery store, nobody is really thinking abundantly.
Yeah.
And nobody's thinking about how to earn more money. All the conversations are around like, when can I retire? And the hard part is too, it doesn't matter what state you show up in when you work at a grocery store. I could have had the craziest night out and could have been doing the worst things possible. And I show up the next day and guess what? Like, groceries scan exactly the same.
Yep.
And like, I look at the self-checkout line too, and like that thing's doing my freaking job.
Yep.
And so knowing with the mentality like that this is the end, I think helped me a lot when I started in the opportunity. But funny enough, like I was so self-conscious about when I first started, just knocking on doors, even though my dad had the pride in it, that I grew up in Chico, California. I knew a ton of people out there. So when I would knock on doors, I'd be scared that I'd run into a friend that I know. And I hadn't fully developed the pride that I needed to have in it. And so for the first 2 months, I would like look up books on how to build confidence in sales. And I continued to read. And then I ended up reading this one quote, and it was constant repetition creates conviction. And it was funny because I was looking for every other answer possible. And that's typically not the answer you want to hear. I'm sure you've trained reps and you're like, he's like, why am I not confident? It's like, well, you don't have the reps yet, dude.
Yeah.
It's just like, baseball. If you'd swung a bat 100 times, you'd probably suck. But 1,000 times, we're getting better, 10,000. And so after 2 months of repetitions and going in $2,500 worth of credit card debt because I wanted to make it happen so bad.
Yeah.
And my parents weren't willing to lend me any money or anything either, which was another great lesson in itself.
Yep.
My third month in, I hit 8 deals and it just like broke the seal.
Yep.
This is possible. And after that, just kept progressing, going from rep to manager. And as we'll talk about more, starting up an EPC.
Yeah.
A dealer in between there. And
yeah, that's awesome. Was it a setter closer model or were you self-generating deals or?
Yeah, it was a setter closer model, but it was so unorganized at the time. It was so funny. Like we were really consistently doing around 200 accounts a month, and 100 of those accounts would be storage with Tesla Powerwalls on them. Honestly, we were benefiting so heavily from what had happened in the area that we were living in. Like a whole town, and if you know about the Paradise Fire, 12,000 homes burnt down overnight due to the utility PG&E out there. And so obviously like there's a ton of pain around, people paying their utility bill and the power going out all the time. Because now anytime there's winds above even like 30 miles an hour, they go public safety power shut off, everybody's power's out.
Yeah.
And so it's constantly happening. And so I think it's a good thing because it builds your confidence. Obviously that's like an artificial like accident that's happening outside.
Yeah.
But we're selling so many accounts and we're the number one installer for, Tesla Powerwalls in the nation. Yeah. We're going and touring the Gigafactory. And like, we had no systems at all. There was no there was no sales reports or there was no like sales rabbit that we were using. Like it was literally just a group me scoreboard of like, oh, we're at 200 now. Like, let's keep selling.
Bang. Yeah. Take those times when they come. Huh?
Oh yeah.
Yeah.
But I think it's one of the best ways to learn as well. Because without the systems, you have to become really resourceful. And I think that's something that like when you first start out, if your first experience is in a big box company, is all the resources are there and you can get whatever you want, whenever you want, from whoever you want with inside that organization.
Yeah.
But if you have to go and find and create your own solutions within an organization that doesn't have a ton of that structure, it actually makes you, I think, gives you the ability to later on be a better business owner. rather than just being given all the resources from the beginning.
It's an interesting question. I think about it a lot with like trying to like train my rep, and even in like trying to like parent my kids
Yeah.
and stuff like that. Like there's all these little dilemmas of like multiple sides of the coin. Like is it, like you just said, like, is it better to like work at like a super scaled out company where there's all the support and you just sell? You know, I'm sure somebody could, you know, preach the gospel of that one. They could be like, yeah, all you want to do is focus on sales. And then some other place would be like, well, you become more resourceful. Something I think about a lot with my kids is like, is it like basketball is a good example. Do you want to play on the really good team where practice is good and everything's the best?
Yeah.
But because it's the really good team, you're a role player. Or do you want to play on a team where the ball goes through you and you take 30 shots a game, but you guys suck?
Yeah.
You know what I mean? It's like
yeah. It's definitely perspective, and like people can succeed from every angle. And I think like, I think either way, I've seen people win. And that's so hard to make that decision, even for like reps. Now I have a hard time when they come into the organization and we have everything just completely scaled out in all the systems.
Yeah.
And they're like, Christian, what do I do here? And I have this SOP that I could hand them to do exactly what they want to do.
Yeah.
And like a part of me feels exactly like you, where I'm like, should I give it to them or should I let it fight for them?
You catch yourself telling a lot of back in my day stories.
Yeah, exactly.
I do, dude. I tell a
Walk
million.
5 miles uphill in the snow.
Yeah. When I started, we didn't have any systems.
They didn't even have panels. We just had to make them, you know. Like
I do the same. That's funny.
It's too funny.
So you break through first, what was it? Third month, you said?
Yeah.
But first big month. And where's it kind of go from there? Like how long are you setting? Or you said it was disorganized. Like was there like no clear way that a person gets promoted?
No, there was no like metrics. It was, I mean, it was like the unspoken rule is as soon as you hit 8 accounts, like you're a closer now. You automatically become a closer. And there was no like setter leadership positions either. So like every single time somebody starts doing well, they get promoted to a closer. And you know, if you know anything about solar, that starts to sabotage your organization, because as soon as you get promoted to closer, like there's this big learning curve. And for the next couple months, you sell 1 to 2 to 3 accounts. And then you get back to 8. And same thing happens to me. But then I start progressing after that. And funny enough, I was offered an opportunity to go out to Redding, which was north of Chico, about an hour and 30 minutes, to go and start an office out there. And I start managing this office. And about 2 to 3 months in, still selling a ton of accounts. I have probably $50,000 to $60,000 in the pipeline. And homeowners start getting liens on their home. And we're like, what the heck is going on? So we take this stuff to like the ownership group at the time. And we're like, why are these homeowners getting like liens on their home? And they're like, oh, don't worry about it. It's just like a preconditional notice. Like, we're going to pay the distributor. It'll all be good. And then a couple months later, they started getting more serious lien letters.
Now, just to make sure I understand, because some people, you know, it doesn't work the same as in solar. So you guys are... you're not an EPC at this time. Install's not in-house.
No, we were. It was an EPC. I wasn't the founder of this one, luckily. But they're going and installing these accounts, but they get them on a credit line from the distributor, or they get the equipment on a credit line from the distributor.
Oh, so this is coming from like back the chain.
Yes.
Yeah.
And so if you don't pay those accounts post-install, what happens is then the homeowner is obligated to pay for that equipment.
Oh.
And it's not set up in the best way at all. And I'm sure a ton of that has changed.
Okay. Sorry. One more time. So solar company buys equipment from solar
They get it on a credit line.
Whatever. On a credit line. From solar like manufacturer or something. Okay. And then if the solar company doesn't pay the solar manufacturer, they go after the homeowner?
Not the manufacturer, but the distributor. So like, let's say, for example, Q Cells is the solar company. They sell the equipment to the distributor CED. CED then gives, let's say Phoenix Solar at the time was the company, gives it to them on a credit line. And if they don't pay for that equipment, then like you said, homeowners on the hook for it.
Gross.
Terrible. And like one of the worst experiences in the world. So like, you know, all these homeowners, I have like 15 to 20 different homeowners that end up having like these lien notices. And so like keeping all of those homeowners calm, like was probably one of the biggest challenges ever. But if you ever want to learn how to like,
Customer
service at the highest level within 1 to 2 months, like that's your crash course right there. Hope it never happens to you.
Right.
But then eventually those accounts get paid off. Luckily, homeowners are okay, but I lose $50,000 to $60,000 in the pipeline.
Yeah.
And the normal reaction from any rep is just to think that the industry is terrible. I'm getting out. I can't believe door to door. Solar companies suck. My initial reaction for some weird reason was that if one solar company is bad, then why don't we just become a dealer and we'll just have 3 different options. And so if one's not doing good, we could pick the other.
More control.
And so I end up starting a dealer program with another business partner at this time.
Can I just say too, every time you learn something crappy, okay, you learn something crappy about the industry, okay, presumably everybody else is dealing with it.
Yeah.
But you, like you have just said, have just had a 1 to 2 month crash course in dealing with it.
Yeah.
Okay, well now you have a competitive edge.
Yeah.
There's going to be some way that this comes back around to paying you.
Yep.
Because now you're the guy who knows how to overcome the crappy thing that we all deal with.
Yep.
You know what I mean?
Yeah, the perspective, like adversity, everything else is easy after that.
Yeah.
Like that's probably one of the hardest things that you could possibly go through. Knocking doors is easy after that. Closing is easy after that. Having hard conversations and like a leadership setting with reps is easy after that.
Yeah.
And so we start this dealer. I started with a business partner and I'm selling through another local installer. And the operations manager is my now business partner.
Okay.
His name's Cody Pitts. And so turns out the EPC at the time comes to me and they're offering me equity in their business because we're doing a lot of their sales volume. Mm-hmm. But then Cody's handling all the installation volume as their, operations manager. And he gets offered equity as well. And so Cody and I start talking. He's like, how much? And he's like, hey, did you get offered equity? And I was like, yeah. And he's like, I got offered equity too. He's like, how much did you get offered? And like, we're going through the deals and everything and like looking at the paperwork and we both got offered 15%. And we knew the ownership stake of about everybody in the business.
Yeah.
And it turns out like we were both being offered the same amount of equity. And it was just whoever ended up taking it first was going to be a part of that business. And they were,
Oh, they only had 15% to give.
Yeah.
Yeah.
And so,
and just so I understand, why were they offering you equity? Did they want you to quit sending deals to other EPCs?
Correct.
For
Yeah.
exclusivity.
Yep.
Okay.
Exactly.
Got it. Yep.
And so Cody and I started talking about this and we're like, dude, they're offering us the same equity. Like if they believe in us to do this, why don't we just do this together?
Yeah.
And so we end up starting an EPC. And it's funny, it just happened so quick. I literally go over to his house. We're in the driveway and we're just sitting on like the back of his truck. And we're like, should we start an EPC? And he's like, yeah, what do you want the red line to be? And he's like, well, the equipment would cost this much and we could build this much into the profit. And okay, it'll be that. And we're like, okay, we'll get things started. And like a month later, we have everything started. We rent a warehouse. We have one installation truck. And we have one girl that we know that was doing the permitting and the final inspections and everything. Cody's doing the site survey, the installation by himself, and I'm selling the accounts.
Fire.
And
love it.
So it was a great experience to start that way. And then naturally, we start recruiting from these other companies that we had worked at.
Yeah.
And we start bringing some sales talent in and it starts growing and scaling. And I think just that experience of like, starting out without any of the systems from the beginning allowed me to be resourceful in this new experience of starting an EPC where I had to be so resourceful. Like to go and find sales talent and recruit somebody into an organization where you have a warehouse and literally no desks at all. There's no like back end sales support. So the vision that you're trying to pitch, it isn't there. It doesn't exist in this warehouse.
Yep.
And so eventually, we start, bringing on some sales talent, the organization scales, and we're closer to where we are today.
How do you do it? How do you bring on those first few people? Like, is the pitch different than your pitch now?
Yeah, wildly different. I didn't know where the organization was going to go either.
Yeah.
But the pitch at that point too, it's like, it's so funny to think back, but a lot of the conversation is around like, hey, do you want this red line or like, pricing almost like the vision that I'm pitching isn't that great at this point. Like I haven't fully developed into my career where I know how to like start recruiting on value. And then we have these core values that line up and we need to make sure that they align with those. And how would you scale within the organization and conversations like that?
Sometimes in new orgs, and I think this is kind of gross personally.
Yeah.
What they do is they just start giving away leadership positions. That's another one.
Yep.
Don't love that.
Yeah. And we made that mistake too, for
Yeah.
sure. But as the organization grows, we start getting some of those systems and such, and those things start to change. But even like I needed to grow at that point too. So my business partner, Cody, I was pretty consistently selling around 8 deals. And then I start making some money. And, when we have the CPC, I start going on vacation and being like irresponsible. And I'm a young kid at this point. I'm like, 23, 24 years old.
Yeah.
Cody has an accountability conversation with me. And he's like, dude, if we're going to be business partners, this can't happen anymore.
Yeah.
And you get kind of taken back because you're like, oh, I'm making all this money. Like, how is this not okay? And then he's like, you have a bigger obligation. You have like a moral obligation to all these guys to make sure that this opportunity works out. And so I start changing the way that I operate, and we start recruiting. And funny enough, a lot of the ways that I started to recruit, talk about being resourceful, is in California, there's a home improvement salesperson's license list. And it's it's like a directory.
Yeah.
And so anybody
with phone numbers?
Correct. Yeah. So there's
Easy
there's your
peasy.
recruiting tip. Call all the guys at OHM, please. All right. But so I start calling, and I end up calling this gentleman named Max, who's like one of the biggest guys in our organization now. Mm-hmm. And I bring him over, and it's funny because I built the organization. I made a mistake in building it to compete instead of collaborate.
Yeah.
So I have Cody as my business partner. And then we have Ryan, who we brought on as a business partner early on in the organization. He's running another team. I'm running a team. And we have another guy named Faradin who's running a team as well. And we're all competing against each other. But like, I'm the business owner. Shouldn't we all be collaborating to like grow together?
Yeah.
But I want to win at all costs. And so we bring on Max, and we just start recruiting like crazy. And I think what allowed me to see a bigger vision too, and like being able to start doing more accounts, is that I started listening to podcasts like this. Like I was listening to the Door Knocker podcast. I was listening to Sam Taggart's Door to Door Experts. And I'm learning that people are out and doing like 100 to 200 accounts a month pretty consistently with one team. And the best cue for imagination is education.
Yeah.
And as soon as I get this education and like understanding what's possible, you know exactly what you can do. And so we start recruiting, and then we start scaling.
Because you were probably going on vacations thinking you're the big dog.
Oh, yeah.
Bro, I'm 23. I've made it.
Yep.
I'm rich.
100%.
Whatever. And then you go listen to the podcast, and you're like, oof, I'm a chump, actually.
It wasn't a good look. Yeah. And looking back, not super proud of it. But
that's funny.
We're growing the team, and we get to about 100 accounts a month.
Yeah.
And there still wasn't the best systems in the world. How we were running the team is we had a Google Calendar. And so we have about, 15 to 20 setters on the team, and we have about 4 to 5 different closers. And our version of accountability is like, let's just call 15 to 20 of the guys today and make sure that they're getting out every single day.
Yeah.
Instead of running car groups to make sure that they're getting out and having an actual system that can kind of perpetuate those things. Mm-hmm. And so we're calling these guys. And I think what that does too is like you start to hear all the objections. Just like, for example, you go and knock on a homeowner's door and you hear not interested enough. You eventually you get punched in the face enough. You come up with a solution. Yeah. Same thing when you call a rep to make sure that they're getting out to knock. Mm-hmm. When they say like, I have to do my laundry for the 5th time this week, you eventually start like learning how to get them to think bigger. Yeah. And when they start making excuses as to like, oh, I'm actually working out at, 1 p.m. and it's the middle of the day and you really should be on doors. And, I've done that too. Yeah. You start to learn how to paint that vision for those guys. And I think accountability conversations and the ability to go and have those type of crucial conversations is like the most important skill of a leader. Because when you go into these conversations, you have to be able to tie 2 different whys together. Yeah. Number one, your why of the team and where you want the team to go, and their why too. And when there's alignment, those conversations are really easy and there's no friction. Yeah. But when they have, let's say, for example, $70,000 goals, mm-hmm. and you have a goal to get your team to, 100, 200 accounts, those 2 things don't align.
Yeah, then it's just force, right?
Yep.
Yep. Something I think about with those conversations, because, people will have like 12 different grandmas die. And I'm like, bro, you didn't have 12 grandmas. I know that didn't happen.
Only in door to door, you're the wildest things. It's so crazy.
Like you said, laundry every day. Yeah. Helping literally everybody move. And I'm like, you were the only strong young man these people know.
It's like, did you buy a truck just to make sure that happens?
Yeah. But then the problem is you don't want to be in the position to be calling balls and strikes for all these things. It's like I feel yucky like trying to determine what's a lie and what's not. So I just try to be like, hey, we actually like already had commitments. We already had benchmarks that we were going to hit. And we even built some flexibility for these things in there. So luckily, I don't even have to decide what's legit and what's not anymore.
Yep.
It's just you get X amount per month or whatever your rule is.
Yep.
And after that, I'm not talking about it.
Yep.
You know what I mean?
Yeah, that's beautiful. And that's a perfect example of like managing systems instead of people.
Yeah.
And it takes the emotion out of it as well.
Yep.
100%. And I think just like asking good questions too. It's so funny because like you can try to force your way through those conversations, or you could be like, hey, you know, if we were making your non-negotiable knocking time from 1 p.m. to 6 p.m., when do you think would be a better time to do this? And like allow
maybe 10 a.m.
Yeah, allow them to like answer those questions. And the guys know.
They know.
They know. And the accountability is for them and not to them. And I actually think accountability is like the purest form of love. And so I've gotten past that point too, where like you have these conversations and you're like, am I doing the right thing? Like,
it's tough, man. It's tough. Because you have to be willing to accept like kind of villainy type optics for yourself on occasion. And you have to have 10, 20, 100 people gaslighting you at once and just be like, no, I think I'm right.
Yeah.
It's tough.
I know, because everybody's looking at you like you're the bad guy on the team too. Yeah. But I think after those conversations, you actually create more of a relationship than you ever could have possibly, had. Emotion when you have motion in these conversations, it creates emotion. Mm-hmm. And so like, I think the guys grow closer to you over time too, when you have these hard conversations with them. And especially when they realize that your intentions are to help get them to where they want to go. But that's why the biggest or the most important part of that is like finding guys with a bigger why or a bigger vision too. Yeah. Because then it's always just a reminder of like, hey dude, you told me that you want to get to XYZ place. Like if I don't help you get there, I'm failing you. Yep. Simple as that.
It's winners want to be coached hard.
Yep.
Yeah. That's Nick Saban, right?
100%.
Yeah, because something we deal with in our industry is like, fortunately / unfortunately, you can actually make pretty good money while working like a complete piece of crap. Yeah. And sometimes you have to have that conversation with people where it's like, hey, I understand that you are okay with 2-3 deals a month or whatever the numbers are in a person's particular industry. I understand that you are okay with that. Yep. The problem is that I'm not okay with that. Yeah. So where do we go from here? You know what I mean? Yeah. Yeah, it's I don't know. There's all these little angles to it. Talk about kind of the different perspective that you get knowing what you know about ops.
Yeah. So what you start to learn about operations too is you start to learn and like actually have more empathy for the things that they do. Uh-huh. Because when I was in the position of, running a sales organization, it's like install no matter what. Like I don't care what's going on. Like we need our accounts installed. Like just go install these things.
Trying to get paid, man.
Yeah. What do you mean the final inspection's getting delayed by 2 weeks because the inspector hasn't showed up for the past 3 times that you've scheduled it? Mm-hmm. It really doesn't matter to you. But once you start having empathy, then like sales and operations can actually start working together. Mm-hmm. I feel like that's what we do so well at OWN because I've had that experience too, where you can actually have conversations between sales and operations and there's alignment because you understand their role. Mm-hmm. And then that makes for an easy experience for the homeowner too. Because what can happen sometimes, especially when you're running a sales org, homeowner's frustrated and naturally you don't want to take the blame as the salesperson. So what do you say is like, the installer's really dropping the ball on this one. I'm holding them accountable. I'm making sure that they'll get out there. But when you learn that these counties a lot of the times have some of the craziest restrictions and have some of the craziest schedules, like they'll give you these time frames where they're like, hey, we'll show up anywhere from 9 a.m. until 5 p.m. for this inspection. And then the operations side of the business has to go and sit at this house and sometimes waiting till 4 p.m. for the inspector to show up. Mm-hmm. It gives you a little bit more empathy. And then you can communicate that to your team better and to your leaders better, and you can set better expectations.
That's what I was thinking about too, as you were talking, as I was like, how often do, everybody everybody listening to this is going to have a million examples of times that ops messed it up for them.
Yeah.
But how often do we mess it up for ops by selling a
100%.
wonky deal with bad expectations and 10 moving parts that didn't even need to be there? You know what I mean? I think the problem too in a lot of organizations is that sales and ops don't talk.
Yeah.
Or if they do talk, it's like, imagine like a massive like sales org, like all different levels of the hierarchy, and then the same thing on the ops side. And for them to talk, what you do is you pass it 5 levels up the chain to the VP of sales, who talks to the VP of ops.
Yeah.
Instead of just being like, hey man, Mrs. Johnson needs this. Do you think you could call her? Yes. Okay, thanks.
Yeah. It's like, how inefficient are those conversations that are being had where it has to get passed up the chain every single time?
Yeah.
And I think that leaders can also sabotage like the people that they work with,
Mm-hmm.
where there's an issue that actually doesn't need to get escalated.
Mm-hmm.
And when it gets escalated to you, you could say, no, like, hey, I don't need to deal with this issue. You guys can handle it,
Mm-hmm.
and allow them to figure it out together. But a lot of times we make the mistake as leaders is we want to save the day. And so an issue comes to our plate and we're like, we'll go fix it immediately. But what you end up doing is you teach your people every single time to send the issue to you,
Mm-hmm.
instead of letting them solve it. And so I've noticed that such a better approach in those instances is like, we hire smart people to tell us what to do, not to tell them what to do.
Yeah.
So like, hey, you're a pretty smart guy. Like, what would you do here? And 99% of the time they have the answer. And sometimes, or a lot of the times, actually the answer is better than what I was thinking anyways.
Mm-hmm.
And I think that's like a higher form of leadership than just trying to solve all of your people's problems.
Agreed. So talk about kind of like scaling up from, the way you started, just 2, 3, 4 of y'all to 100 people now.
Yeah. So you have to create systems too. And your systems are perfectly designed to give you the results that you get as well.
Yeah.
And so essentially, like, I was the bottleneck of the business, because every single time something was, going wrong within the sales organization, my cure-all would be like, okay, let me have an accountability conversation with this guy. Let me sit down and let me paint a bigger vision for him. And I'm going to make sure that he's getting out for the next couple of weeks. But you can only do that with so many people until it ends up, becoming exhausting, and you exhaust that skill, and you have to be able to duplicate it. And I think that a lot of people have limiting mindsets around delegation as well. They think it's like this evil thing that CEOs do so that they don't have to work.
Yeah.
And that can be true if you don't do these 3 steps, which are recruit, transfer your skill set, but then fill your time with higher leverage activities.
Yep.
And that's the part that people miss for the most part, is they've missed the last part, which is fill your time with higher leverage activities.
Yep.
And so I didn't know how to transfer my skills other than by showing people how to do it. And leading from the front is so important, but there's so many more aspects to the job. Like, you have to create SOPs around the things that you're really good at and document processes so that you can pass them on to other people, instead of you being the bottleneck and telling everybody exactly what to do. Just like people say telling isn't selling, telling isn't also leading.
It's kind of funny too, because the leader who wants to do everything, a lot of the time their internal mantra is, I'm the best at this. And it might be true. Maybe you are. But if you can't teach anybody else to be good at it, then while you're thumping your chest for being good at the thing, you also have to accept that you're a bad teacher.
Yep.
You know what I mean?
Yeah. And take ownership for it. And I love this, this framework, or this idea, is that like 80% done by somebody else is 100% freaking awesome. Mm-hmm. But if you don't like somebody else's 80%, then that says more about your 100% than it does their 80%.
Yep.
And that goes back to like the law of the lid, is you have to raise your capacity as a leader to be able to teach people how to do the things that you do. Mm-hmm. And so we've built a recruiting department now where guys that are running teams, are getting 16 to 20 interviews each and every week. And then we have to track the numbers, and we're actually making data-driven decisions. Instead of before in the past, I would, call a manager and I'd be like, how'd your interviews go? And he's like, I said this and I said that. I'm like, dude, don't say that. That's not right. Like, you need to pull back in that situation, and like, you need to get him to chase the opportunity, instead of like, hey, if you were to run an interview, these are the top 5 interview questions. If a candidate says this is how you pull back and reframe the conversation, and have them reference the SOP instead, and teach your people to be resourceful instead of answering all those questions. So when your guys ask a question, hey, in an interview, what do I say here? It's so easy to make the mistake as a leader to be like, oh, Levi, you just say this here. Mm-hmm. But it's so much better to be like, hey, go and take a look at the SOP. Tell me what you find and come back to me like once you've read through the thing.
If you didn't understand it. Or if you understand it, don't come back to me. Just do it. Just do it that way.
Yeah. And you actually start to empower your people that way too, because it shows that you trust in what they do.
Yeah.
But that's how we started scaling the organization, is through systems. We brought in a VP of sales, one of my favorite people in the world, Jody Leo, and he was over at Vivint for 18 years. And, well, I mean, before Vivint, there were some other companies there, but it's been cool too. There's even these like times where you have to set your pride aside. And like, there's been so many times that Jody's come up with solutions for things that I'm like, dude, I never would have thought of that. And it's like, we always think that our ideas are the absolute best ideas in the world, but learning how to delegate and allow people to be creative in your business and make decisions as well is just, it's so important.
Yeah.
But it's hard because when you're growing as a sales leader, all that you're taught to do, lead from the front, lead from the front, lead from the front. Yeah. And while that is important, at a certain point, like, you do have to set it aside temporarily for some of the conversations that you do have.
Yeah. So, as the org gets big, you have 100 people, you have a lot of good things delegated now. What are high leverage activities for you?
Yeah. I mean, the highest leverage activity anybody can do is recruiting 100%.
Agreed.
Like, you can, a sale is a 1-for-1 transaction. There's leverage there potentially, and you can leverage a sale through referrals, right? A 1-for-1 transaction could turn into 1-for-3 or 1-for-4, and if you involve their family members. But if you go and you find a really talented rep, that's a 1-for-100 transaction if they can go into 100 accounts. Yeah. Let's say, for example, you find a really talented leader, that could be a 1-for-1,000. Like, you have 1,000x leverage in those type of conversations. And so there's nothing more important in the business to be able to do that. And luckily, you know Alex Hall and Brandon Hall?
A little bit.
Shut the fluff up. So they have some of the best recruiting systems in the world, and they've helped us scale our recruiting systems to be able to consistently bring in guys. And I think you get to the point in an organization where recruiting setters and closers is the easy part. Your biggest bottleneck just becomes leadership, like any business. You know, if you had unlimited leaders, you could have unlimited offices. Yep. And then your biggest problem would just be scaling ops to go and fill that. But yeah, that I think that becomes the biggest bottleneck of any business.
So you kind of started to answer this, but just to flesh it out even further, within recruiting, because I mean, like, even that, like, a low leverage recruiting activity would just be like walking around someplace, talking to people one-on-one. Yeah. Are there highest leverage activities within recruiting? Like, kind of sounded like you were talking about like recruiting SOPs. Stuff like that.
Yeah. So it's different for like whatever position you're in. So like, let's say, for example, if you're a manager, like, your highest leverage opportunity is getting people to recruit through warm networks, right? Okay. So teaching your organization how to create a bench list, which is a list of different people that they've met throughout time, which could be like, hey, let's go through first grade, second grade, third grade, fourth grade, fifth grade, sixth grade, especially if they're local. Okay, junior high, let's start listing our people. And then we can rank these people 1 to 3. Yep. And then we can teach you how to start having conversations with these people. And the mistake that people have is they think that recruiting is a text like, hey, you know, Levi, would you like to come and work over at home? We're making a ton of money.
Copy paste.
Yeah, exactly. But once you learn how to tactfully have the conversation where you can ask through people, it's like, hey, Levi, I'm sure everything's, you know, going amazing at the place that you're at. You know, however, we do make a ton of money over here. You know, if the stars ever end up aligning and you know anybody that's like really good for this opportunity, would you happen to just like let me know? And when you ask through people, then a lot of times they'll raise their hand and be like, oh, what about me? You know?
You know what's funny too is one of my things I've learned over the years is that 2/3 of people will tell you their current job sucks. Yeah. So when you say, hey, I'm sure things are going great where you're at. You're a talented guy. I'm sure you're killing it over there. Yep. And then you ask your question. Then they say, actually, I hate my job.
That's funny.
Oh, well, shoot, dude. That's crazy. So here's what we're doing anyway.
And then people also make the mistake of when they're recruiting as well, and they get in the interview and the candidate says, oh, you know, this is commission only. And then people will make the mistake of trying to sell the job even further, but then the candidate thinks that it's like an MLM type interview. And if you can like reframe and regain control in that conversation, like the first prerequisite, everybody knows this for an interview, is that the candidate should be confident.
Yep.
So if somebody says, oh, is this commission only? And that doesn't scare us a little bit, like that's not a good thing. That'd be like if somebody was interviewing for NASA and they're like, well, what if I couldn't get on the rocket ship? Is there a second one? Like as an interviewer, you should be like, what the hell is this
I'm
guy
looking
thinking?
for non-flying pilot positions.
Yeah, exactly. And so I think, talented interviewers start to learn how to reframe that and be like, are you asking the question simply because you're just curious or because you think that you couldn't sell one deal within a month? And now the candidate has to like, it kind of hits them a little hard.
Yeah.
And now they have to like explain to you why they would be a good fit for the position and why they're not actually scared to do it. And then you're in the position of authority and you're attracting.
Totally.
No, I'm getting off on a little tangent here.
No, you're good. You're good. Yeah. So like managers, it's going to be a lot about getting everybody to recruit their warm networks. And then, sounds like the execution of the interview is a big one.
100%.
Any other high leverage recruiting
I think
activities?
another high lever or the highest leverage activity beyond that too is just attraction. I think that's the highest form of recruiting is attraction.
Yeah.
So my mentor, Dan Martell, talks about daily non-negotiables. So what I do is I send out 5 direct messages every single day. And they're not always to people like I'm looking to recruit. Sometimes it could just be a person like I want to chat about and hear the things that they're doing in their organization.
Yeah.
But if you consistently send 5 direct messages every single day and you do 3 story posts every single day, then people get to see what's going on inside of your organization.
Yep.
And just constantly sharing. Because there's going to be somebody out there that's in the position where they're looking for a new opportunity. And it just so turns out that the system that you just posted that you're, using in your organization to help scale is the exact same thing that they were looking for at their last organization.
Yep.
And timing is the hardest part of recruiting, right? And so how you can solve those things is just by being very vocal and attracting.
Can I just jump on something? Because that was a great thing. You said timing is the hardest part of recruiting.
Yeah.
That's why I don't do the texts.
Yep.
It's because you're dependent not only on this being the right person, but this being the right moment as well.
Yep.
And that's where I think social media and just, having your brand just be front and center all the time gets around that, is because then instead of sending them a text and then they have to opt out, it's out there for everybody at all moments and they opt in.
Yes.
You know what I mean?
Yes, exactly.
Yeah.
Attracting instead of chasing.
Yeah.
It's so uncomfortable. And that's why people get scared of recruiting too, to just be messaging people all day and hearing no. Like, that's what we do for door to door, but it's a little bit more personal when you're like, hey, come work at this, company.
Right.
And so when you can start to learn how to attract people, that is the highest leverage. And we live in an attention economy as well. The more attention you can bring to the things that you're doing, the higher value or higher leverage for your business.
Agreed. So as we kind of start to wrap up, give us kind of some vision here. Where's Ohm going? What are you trying to do?
Yeah. So the goal for Ohm is to become the number 1 installer in California. I think that there's a huge opportunity within California because when NEM 3 happened, you probably heard about it. So many companies were just like, I
don't even know what it means, to be honest, but I know that it sucked for solar people.
Yeah. It's enough to know. And so typically, like when that happens, that means that there's a lot of opportunity. Like Warren Buffett says it, when there's blood in the streets, typically the best time to invest type of thing. And so there's just a huge opportunity. There's so many abandoned systems. There's so many homeowners, especially now with the electrification of the home, especially in California with EVs and everything, that are using more energy. And when they got their 8 panels, they need additional systems. And so for Ohm, it's just scaling all the way through California, becoming the number 1 installer and fully integrated sales company.
Yeah.
In California, we don't do a dealer program or anything like that. I'm all about internal sales.
Yeah.
Because you can actually scale it and what people are selling as well.
Keep it pure. Yeah. Yep. Focus on training, all that type of stuff. Well, and going back to the NEM thing too, it's like, it just kind of goes back to now you get to be paid for being the one who knows how this works.
Yeah.
NEM doesn't mean you can't sell solar in California. it means that people who know how it works can sell solar in California and the other ones can't.
Yep.
You know what I mean?
100%.
Yeah.
And it's going to happen in every other market too.
Yeah.
Like every other market's version of NEM 3 is coming. I think Florida is guaranteed their NEM program till 2028. Chicago's going through it right now where they're switching to NEM 3. And guess what? All the people that learned how to sell in California, what's going to happen when all these other states open up to a NEM 3. And so that's genuinely what I'm excited for.
Love it. Love it. So if our listeners want to catch up with you, where can they find you?
So they can find me at C_DeLuca. And then also, like, I love to be abundant and share things because I always wish that I had a mentor that just gave me all the systems in the world where I could just plug and play them into my business.
Yep.
And so if anybody wants any of the systems that we're using at home, I'll just DM you them. So if you just DM me the word systems, I'll send them to you because I wish I had that.
Yep.
Just out of abundance. I don't sell coaching or anything. So.
Yeah. Cool. Well, thanks for coming on, man.
Levi, awesome. Thanks for having me on, man.
Sweet.
Cool.
Thanks for tuning in to another episode of D2D Success Stories. Check in next week for another episode.